Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. This is going to be an interesting podcast because this is a fascinating story by the award-winning columnist in the Des Moines Register, Rekha Basu, a friend of the podcast. She's been on before. And I saw this column entitled, "It's a Race Against Time to Save a Young Iowa Woman with a Rare Aggressive ALS." And I got to get Rekha back on the show because both of our lives have been forever touched by this insidious disease. And this story is, it's like a movie script, Rekha, up in northwest Iowa. What can you tell us about this?
Well, it's actually a really sad story. So there were these identical twins from Storm Lake, Iowa, JC and Alex Hermstad. And one of them was, actually she wasn't diagnosed. She died 8 years ago after suffering from an illness for, I guess she lived with it for about 6 years, that nobody could diagnose until very close to her death.
Is it because she was so young they couldn't diagnose it?
No, they did all kinds of tests, but yeah, I think that it never occurred to anyone that someone that young would be stricken with ALS. I think she was 11 when she got it. So, so they did a variety of tests, but they may not have tested for ALS until pretty late in the game. They thought it was many different things, but they never realized it was ALS. And so she was one of two identical twins. And now, and as I said, I think she died, 11 years ago or 8 years ago? And now her identical twin has been diagnosed with it too. And it's apparently they shared the same gene because they're identical twins. So the mystery is, why did it take so much longer for one of them to develop it than the other? And they haven't figured that out yet. But there are medical researchers on the East Coast who are studying this gene and have been studying it ever since the first one, Alex's death, and her sister JC. Now they're studying JC. And they're actually coming up with what they think could be a successful treatment for JC, but it's a race against time because they have to get FDA approval. First, they've actually created the medication, and it's tailored just to this one individual on the planet, and it needs 6 weeks of clinical trials. And the family is afraid that JC just doesn't have that much time left to live, that in 6 weeks she could be gone. So they are just pleading with the FDA to rush this, to try to give preliminary approval within a week's time so that it has a chance of saving JC's life. It's really, it's just so time sensitive right now. And, you just feel for this family. They lost one of two children to ALS already, and now they're looking at losing another. And the other thing is that they have to pay the cost of all of the research on this, so that totals to about $700,000. So there are massive GoFundMe campaigns. I think so far they've raised about $200,000, but they have another $500,000 yet to raise just to pay for the cost of making this drug and testing it. So, imagine, though, if it were your child, you'd go to the ends of the earth to make it happen. And I think since I wrote the column, there's been a flood of donations, but it still comes nowhere near matching the cost of this, and the time factor is really sensitive.
Wow. Well, that's the reason I wanted to do the podcast. I've got a little segment of the universe with the podcast, and I want to encourage everybody that listens in, that knows me, that knows what I went through, and our families, to go to that GoFundMe page. Now, that's a Facebook page, or is it online? Where is that?
It's a Facebook page, and it's called Cowgirl Up for JC. I think that's what it's called. I'm going to try and pull it up right now. Cowgirl Up for JC. And it's linked to a GoFundMe account. And yes, any donation, however little, counts. So the family is saying $5, $10, whatever you can afford. Yeah, it's called Cowgirl Up for JC, roping in a cure for ALS.
Yeah.
So
Go
yeah.
there, contribute, because it's a race and time is short. And if you've ever been through this, it goes the time. You just can't believe how it slips away. So let me again. I see your columns. Read them all. And I saw this. Oh, Rick is talking about ALS again. Man, I got to read that. Then I'm reading this column, and I had to reread it about 3 times to follow this, and I want to go over it because we're on audio and we're just talking, and people can't reread this. This young lady up in northwest Iowa contracts ALS. She's an identical twin at age 11. Nobody is able to diagnose it. She lives with it for 6-7 years or something like that. And
5 of those on a ventilator, actually.
Yeah,
she lived
I
for
read
6
that.
years and 5 were on a ventilator, and that was her choice. The parents didn't encourage it, but she wanted to, she wanted to live.
My sister was on one, and it's a horrible thing. So she succumbs to ALS at age 17. Everybody knows they're identical twins and things are identical. The other sister doesn't get it. And every day that goes by, everybody's thinking, my God, maybe people don't understand this disease. Maybe she's dodged a bullet. She's not going to get it. 7 years go by, and she contracts it. She's got it. And it took her sister. They know exactly what it is. They know it will progress. It'll probably progress at about the same speed, and she'll end up in the same circumstance if they don't get the money and the drug that she needs. And this drug that's interesting too. It's specific to her.
Yes, because it is this particular... So, there's always been a theory that ALS, every time it strikes someone, it's a slightly different illness, that it's not just one boilerplate illness. And so the treatments have to vary a little bit. And so this drug is being manufactured specifically for this one genetic mutation that these twin sisters shared. So although it will only, at this moment, if it works, benefit J.C. Hermstad, the approach, right, the way of manufacturing it could benefit other people with ALS in the future. That is the hope.
My God, let's hope so. And again, I had no idea. I got to tell you the truth, Rick. I don't follow the ALS stuff as much as I used to because my sister and my best friend's wife died of it, and I don't know. I can't hardly take reading about it sometimes.
I know.
Yeah.
Same here. I mean, honestly, when Rob died, a friend said, I'm going to pledge to following the whatever innovations they make in treatment for this illness. And I was thinking to myself, don't tell me if a week from now they come up with a cure. I couldn't bear that, because we just lost Rob. But now I think I'm far enough away from it. It's going to be 13 years since his death this month, that I really want to see a cure. And I just can't bear the idea of these 2 sisters. And this is this young, vivacious woman. She's 25 years old. She rides horses. She wants to change the world. They live in Spencer, Iowa now. And she has everything to live for. And yet, it's this crazy race against time. But for the first time, in my understanding, there is actually hope of a cure. So they think that they can actually reverse some of the loss. So JC right now is in a wheelchair. She can still talk fine. She can still lift things. She has muscle strength in her arms, but she can't walk. And it seems that every day there's more rapid progression of her illness. So they just don't know when they wake up every morning what ability she's going to have lost. So it's really a race against time. And they feel that with this medication they can arrest it where it is and maybe do a little bit of reversal, but how far back they can go with the treatment, to reverse things that have already happened is unclear. So they just need this drug today. They just, they just desperately want. And the thing is, yes, I understand that every new drug needs to have a thorough clinical trial testing period, right? But in this case, what would they lose by giving it to her without having thoroughly vetted it, right? She's going to die anyway. So, just give it to her and see what happens. At worst, she will die anyway. But at best, maybe it can arrest it where she is right now.
There's the GoFundMe page for the money part of it. What about the lien on the FDA? How do we raise our voice to those folks or to Washington? Or what do we do with that? Is there any
Honestly, if anyone has any contact with the federal government, if anyone has any connections with anyone in the Trump administration who's connected to the FDA, or even can use your influence with a member of Congress, please use your voice and urge them to release this drug to J.C. Hermstad immediately, as soon as they've done like even minimal amount of testing. A week's worth of testing is what the family was hoping for, and that's scheduled to begin May 13th. So, the FDA is saying they want to take 6 weeks to test it. The family is saying give it a week and then please get it to JC.
Wow.
So, yes, this may take some political, influence, and if anyone has an in with the Trump administration, please use it.
Yeah.
Please use it to encourage this. My column on this is also available online, and if anybody wants to read it, go to DesMoinesRegister.com/Basu, and you'll find it. And it tells you the details. It was published, I think, on May 3rd. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's Des Moines Register /Basu, BASU, and I don't know, Rocky.
Exactly.
You've written hundreds of, maybe thousands of columns. I've read most of them, but this is something else. I mean, it may be one of your most tragic and one of your best columns. I mean, this is something beyond belief. Now this is the other thing. There's some numerology involved in this. The first young woman died on February 14th, Valentine's Day, and the diagnosis for her sister was on February 14th. Good Lord! And May is ALS awareness, so it's that's the awareness month for ALS. So it's great to be talking about this. And like the folks at ALS told us on an earlier podcast, once you've seen one case of ALS, you've seen one case. And that's kind of what this is all about. There can't be anything else like this in the world. It's a drug that's specific to them that needs to be provided in a very short time frame, or the second twin sister is going to die. And people can help with this. They're still way short of that financial goal, $700,000 they need. And does any of that come from the ALS organizations? Is it all coming from GoFundMe? And I'm thinking about those bucket challenges and all the money they had at one time. Has that been used up, or is any of that available, I wonder?
I don't think it is. I think this is something that is entirely on the family to come up with, because it is for this one particular individual. And, you would think that there would be association interest in it. And I know that they are publishing this piece that I wrote on their national newsletter, and so hopefully it will generate some interest on the part of people. People have been generous. There's been a fundraiser in Spencer that raised close to $100,000. People have been very generous. The family says they have been really embraced by the community, but $700,000 is a lot of money to come up with, and in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So they really want. What is today's date?
Today's the 10th of May.
10th. So the clinical trial. So they just had a meeting in the last week with the FDA. The drug makers did, and the FDA granted approval to proceed with the clinical trials, but they're supposed to start on May 13th, and they're saying it'll take 6 weeks. And all of us who care about JC, really want them to get it to her sooner, like within a week's time. So, there's another angle to this, which is heartbreaking. After, I guess, right around the time that her twin sister was dying at the age of 17, JC submitted some of her own blood samples and tissue samples to researchers who were trying to study the case of this girl who was as young as 11 years old being diagnosed with ALS. And JC said at the time that when they tested her tissue, I guess they could have detected whether she had the gene as well, but she didn't want to know, because at that time there was no cure on the horizon, no treatment, no nothing. And, how do you live your life knowing that you're going to be diagnosed, that you have this fatal disease, you're going to come down with it? So she didn't know. And, they were sitting on this information, and she didn't know. And now they've come up with this potential treatment that even didn't exist like a few months ago, and now it's a race against time. So it's just so sad that, had they known sooner and started working on it sooner, there would have been more hope for her.
What do you? I know you've talked to the folks a little bit to get some insight on this, but I'm interested in this drug, of course, and in anything that might have some broader application would be a game changer for so many lives. Do you feel, or do you think that this drug may have some broader application, or do you think it will just remain specific to her case if it can help her at all?
I think this particular drug will probably remain specific to her case, but I think the theory behind it, the medical thinking behind it, can be applicable to others. They could make other drugs tailored to different people's cases. So, as I understand it, the treatment is for the protocols, are part of a 100-page application that was submitted to the FDA. It's a drug that's called ASO, which stands for antisense oligonucleotides. It's a tongue twister.
Yeah.
And the deal is that it's a bad gene that she has, and it's a very, very rare genetic mutation. And the hope is that this drug will turn the bad gene off, just turn it off. So the idea is, if this works for this bad gene, then in theory, they could find drugs to turn off other bad genes, right? Along the same lines of thinking for other people who are suffering with ALS. So, I mean, it's really the only hope that I'm aware of for actually stopping progression of the illness that I've known about that has come along in the form of a medication. And it's been, how many years? I've been looking at this for 13 years. You've been following it too, and there just has not been a lot of hope.
Yeah, I mean, we've got these personal landmarks. Your husband, Rob Barcelino, he died May 2006, and my sister, Nancy Sue Erb, succumbed to the disease in December of 2015. And my God, I hope this girl can make it through. I hope this works. Now, the other thing, now I'm becoming more aware. I got to admit, back in the day, I was so dumb, I thought that ALS was an old man's disease, and I found out that women could get it. And then I'm finding out now a girl of 11 years of age has ALS. Has that always been that way, or have they just what's up with that?
No. I mean, at least they weren't being diagnosed. If they were getting it, nobody knew about it, because at the time that Rob was diagnosed, actually that was in 2004 originally, it was characterized as something that affected men primarily in that age group in their 50s. And now, first of all, every year when I go to the ALS March, I have seen increasing numbers of people who are marching and holding up pictures of the people they lost and their families. And it's just escalated, the number of people who have been diagnosed with it, and also the demographics of the people, young people, women, people that have no connection to one another in terms of lifestyle background. It just is hitting so many more people, and you have to ask yourself, what is it in the environment that's causing this? If it's a genetic mutation, why is it happening at such a rapid rate?
Before we close here, I want you to, if you would, give us that URL again for that GoFundMe page. And then the other thing of it, this is, everybody that listens to my podcast, mostly anyway, they're very involved in politics, so they're contacting their elected representatives, and they're communicating with Washington, and they're talking to folks all the time. Now's the time to throw this in. Maybe instead of making a contact about the Mueller report, make a contact about JC and ask them to help if they can. Contact the elected representative that maybe you have a little dialogue with, that you've had a relationship with in the past, and plead with them to do something about this. And at the same time, throw in a little money. What's that URL, Reka?
Yeah, so it's, if you go to facebook.com /help save JCALS is one way you can get there. Or you can just do a search under the words Cowgirl, one word, Up for JC, Roping in a Cure for ALS. So really anything people can do. And this column was distributed nationally, so I'm just hoping that people in other states also who might have some leverage with their members of Congress will use their voices to exert some, political pressure. And at this point, all they're asking for is just to get this drug to JC sooner, within a week.
I'm going to put a link to your column on the web pages for the podcast. I'll put a link to this Facebook page, and then I'll leave it to the listeners to contact whoever they think they have the best shot at. As far as Washington, D.C. is concerned, to help do something to help JC up there in... It's got a Storm Lake Spencer connection, but right now it's Spencer. Is that right? That's where they're located?
Yes, now they live in Spencer. They were living in Storm Lake, and the family moved to Spencer about 5 years ago.
Okay.
So when Alex was suffering from it and when they lost her, they were living in Storm Lake.
Okay.
But they've gotten very good community support in Spencer as well. So yes, I mean, this is one of these stories that just can't help but break your heart, and you think about these parents who are faced with losing their other surviving child now to the same illness. It's so tragic.
What a column. Rick, a great job. Let's get the word out there, and I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I hope this works out for the best.
Good talking to you.
Yeah, because we know what the heartbreak is like.
Good talking to you as always.
Yeah.
And thank you for publicizing her case, George.
Yep, and we'll circle back. I want to talk to you about politics at a future podcast. I've seen you at some events and stuff, but I don't want to do that now. I want to save that for later. Let's focus on JC in Spencer, Iowa. All right. All the best,
okay.
Rika.
Thanks again. And you too. Thanks, George.
Yeah, and thanks, everybody, for listening to another podcast by George.